I watched Director Harrison's mouth move, forming the words I'd heard once before, and felt nothing but calm satisfaction wash over me. His office looked exactly the same. The mahogany desk positioned to intimidate, the medical diplomas arranged to impress, the family photo of him with his precious son David angled just so. Visitors couldn't miss it. "Camilla, I'm afraid we'll have to let you go. Budget constraints, you understand?" His fingers drummed against the desk, a nervous habit I remembered all too well. "David will be taking over your position as head of our pharmaceutical research division." The lies came so easily to him. Just like last time. "I see," I said, my voice steady as I folded my hands in my lap. "And when does this take effect?" Harrison blinked, clearly expecting tears or protests. In my first life, I had given him both. I'd begged, pleaded, asked what I'd done wrong. The memory of my desperation still stung, but now it served a different purpose. It reminded me exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. Effective immediately. His confidence was returning now that I seemed compliant. "Security will escort you out within the hour." Of course. I stood straightening my lab coat one final time. "I'll gather my personal items." As I walked toward the door, I paused and turned back. "Director Harrison, I do hope David's medical degree from that online university will serve him well in pharmaceutical research. The FDA can be quite particular about proper credentials." The colour drained from his face. He knew I knew, just as I'd planned. 30 minutes later, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, watching through the lobby windows as security guards waited by the elevators. They thought I was still inside, packing my belongings like some defeated victim. But I wasn't that woman anymore. The pharmaceutical samples I'd retrieved from the lab were safely locked in my trunk. Samples of the experimental heart medication that would, in 6 months' time, become Harrison's only hope for survival. The same medication his unqualified son would inevitably contaminate due to his complete lack of understanding of proper synthesis protocols. In my first life, I developed this medication over 2 years, only to have David steal my research after Harrison fired me. He'd rushed it to clinical trials, cutting corners I'd specifically warned against in my notes. The contaminated batch had killed 3 patients before they pulled it from testing. But Harrison's heart condition had already been too advanced by then. He'd died waiting for a medication that could have saved him. If only his son hadn't destroyed my life's work with his incompetence. This time would be different. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Elena Rodriguez, my former colleague and the one person in that building I still trusted. "Heard what happened, so sorry, Cam. Want to grab coffee?" I typed back quickly. "Thanks, but I'm fine. Actually, I'm better than fine. Take care of yourself, Eleanor, and maybe start documenting everything David does in the lab. You might need it later." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as I started my car. I had 6 months to establish my own laboratory, perfect my formula, and wait for Harrison to come crawling back. The irony wasn't lost on me. He thought he was destroying my career to elevate his son. Instead, he'd just handed me the perfect opportunity to control his fate entirely. As I drove away from Mercy General Hospital for what I knew wouldn't be the last time, I allowed myself a small smile. In my rearview mirror, I could see Harrison's office window on the 3rd floor. He was probably already calling David with the good news, completely unaware that he'd just signed his own death warrant. But this time, I held the antidote. The next morning, I stood in the empty laboratory space I'd viewed 6 weeks ago, back when I was still playing the part of the loyal employee, still pretending I didn't know what was coming. The realtor had seemed surprised when I'd called to accept their offer so quickly after being suddenly laid off, but money talked, and I had enough saved from my previous life's painful lessons to make this work. The previous tenant left all the equipment, the realtor explained, gesturing to the pristine workstations and centrifuges, some pharmaceutical startup that went under. Their loss is your gain, I suppose? Perfect. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humour. Within hours, I had the lab operational. My fingers moved with practiced efficiency as I calibrated equipment and organised supplies. Every procedure was a muscle memory now. I'd perfected this process once before, albeit under very different circumstances. The synthesis of the heart medication required precise temperature controls and specific timing that David would never understand. He was a business major who'd bought his medical degree online, thinking credentials were just expensive pieces of paper. Harrison knew this, of course, but his nepotism blinded him to the consequences. As I worked, my mind drifted to the timeline I remembered so clearly. David would spend the first month trying to understand my research notes. By month 2, he'd grow frustrated and start improvising. Month 3 would bring the first batch of contaminated medication. Month 4, the clinical trials that should never have been approved. Month 5, the patient deaths that would destroy the hospital's reputation. And month 6, that's when Harrison would collapse in his office, clutching his chest as his heart finally gave out from the congenital condition he'd hidden from everyone. The condition I'd discovered by accident when I'd accessed his medical records while researching family histories of heart disease for my medication trials. The same condition that would require exactly the drug I'd developed if it remained uncontaminated. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Unknown number. Dr. Camilla Reed? Speaking. This is James Mitchell from Phoenix Pharmaceuticals. We heard about your departure from Mercy General. We're interested in discussing a position with our research division. I almost laughed. Phoenix Pharmaceuticals, Harrison's biggest competitor. In my first life, they'd approached me 3 months after my firing, but by then I'd been too broken, too defeated to trust anyone in the industry again. I appreciate the interest, Mr. Mitchell, but I'm pursuing independent research at the moment. A pause. Independent research can be expensive, Dr. Reed. Are you certain we can't offer you something more stable? Quite certain, but thank you for thinking of me. After hanging up, I realised Harrison would hear about this call within hours. The pharmaceutical world was small, and news travelled fast. He'd know that his competitors were already circling, already recognising the value of what he'd thrown away. Let him worry. Let him wonder what I was planning. I returned to my work, carefully measuring compounds with the precision that had made me the youngest department head in Mercy General's history. The same precision David would never possess. The first batch would take 3 weeks to synthesize properly, then another week for initial testing. A month after that, I'd have preliminary results that would revolutionize cardiac treatment. The same results David would be fumbling toward in his stolen position, leaving a trail of contamination and failure in his wake. My computer chimed with an email notification. Dr. Rodriguez, just as I'd expected. Camilla, you were right to leave when you did. David showed up today demanding access to all your files. When I explained the security protocols for pharmaceutical research, he actually asked if he could just copy everything to a flash drive. I documented it all, just like you suggested. Hope you're doing well. I typed a careful response. Thanks for letting me know, Elena. David's enthusiasm is noteworthy. Keep documenting everything. You might be surprised how important those records become later. 6 months. That's all I needed. 6 months for David to prove his incompetence, for Harrison to face his mortality, and for justice to finally balance the scales. But this time, I wouldn't be the victim watching from the sidelines. This time, I held all the cards. 3 weeks into my independent research, the first breakthrough arrived exactly as I'd anticipated. But this time, I was ready for what came next. My secure phone, a precaution I hadn't taken in my first life, buzzed with an encrypted message from a contact I'd cultivated carefully. Dr. Marcus Webb, former FDA inspector turned private consultant, had information I needed. Package delivered to your PO box. Payment as agreed. MW. The package contained photocopies of David's falsified medical transcripts, complete with forged signatures from professors who'd never heard of him. More importantly, it contained Harrison's complete medical history, including the genetic markers that made his heart condition not just inevitable, but accelerating. I spread the documents across my desk, cross-referencing them with my own research files. The timeline was even tighter than I'd remembered. Harrison's last EKG showed irregular patterns that would worsen dramatically within 4 months. His cardiologist, Dr. Nathan Cross, had recommended immediate intervention, a recommendation Harrison had ignored, believing his position at the hospital made him untouchable. Pride. It had been his weakness in my first life, and it remained his weakness now. My lab phone rang, interrupting my analysis. "Dr. Reed, this is Victoria Harrison." I nearly dropped the receiver. Harrison's wife had never contacted me directly before, in either lifetime. "Mrs. Harrison, how can I help you?" Her voice was strained, careful. "I wondered if we might meet for coffee. There are concerns I'd like to discuss privately." Interesting. In my original timeline, Victoria had remained silent until after her husband's death, when she'd approached me at his funeral to apologise for his treatment of me. She'd known about David's incompetence all along, but had been powerless to stop it. "Of course. When would be convenient?" "Today, if possible. The situation at the hospital is developing rapidly." We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown, far from Mercy General's usual haunts. As I prepared to leave, I carefully locked away Harrison's medical files. Victoria Harrison seeking me out this early meant things were already falling apart faster than expected. The cafe buzzed with the usual afternoon crowd, providing perfect cover for a conversation that needed to remain invisible. Victoria sat in the corner booth, her usually perfect composure cracked around the edges. She'd aged in the 3 weeks since I'd last seen her at hospital functions. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid across from her. "I wasn't sure you'd want to speak with me after everything." "I'm not angry with you, Mrs. Harrison. You weren't the one who made the decision." Her laugh was bitter. "Wasn't I? I could have stopped it. Should have stopped it years ago." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "David isn't qualified for this position. You know it, I know it, and deep down, Robert knows it too." "Then, why didn't you intervene?" "Because David is dying." The words hit me like a physical blow. This was new information, something that hadn't existed in my first timeline. "He has the same genetic heart condition as Robert," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But David's is progressing much faster. The doctors gave him 18 months, maybe 2 years if he's lucky. Robert thought giving David this position would give his life meaning in whatever time he has left." My mind raced, recalculating everything. David wasn't just incompetent. He was desperate, a dying man trying to prove his worth by stealing my life's work. The cruelty of it was almost breathtaking. "Mrs. Harrison, I need to ask you something directly. Did David know about my research before the firing?" She nodded slowly. "He'd been reading your files for months. Robert gave him access, thinking it would help him prepare for eventually joining the research team. When David saw how close you were to a breakthrough," she trailed off, "he convinced your husband to fire me so he could claim credit for the discovery. Robert convinced himself it was about budget cuts and David's potential. But yes, essentially." She met my eyes directly. "David believes that if he can get this medication to market, it will be his legacy, something meaningful to leave behind." The tragedy of it struck me fully. 2 men, both dying of the same condition, both destroying the very thing that could save them out of pride and desperation. "What do you want from me, Mrs. Harrison?" "I want you to know that when this fails, and we both know it will, It won't be because Robert wanted to hurt you. It will be because he's a father watching his son die, and he's making terrible decisions out of love. I studied her face, seeing genuine anguish there. You're asking me to forgive him. I'm asking you to remember that sometimes good people do terrible things for impossible reasons. After she left, I sat alone in the cafe for another hour, processing this new information. David's timeline wasn't 18 months. I remembered his collapse from my first life. He had maybe 8 months before his heart gave out completely. Harrison would follow within 6 months of that. Both men were racing against a clock they couldn't see, destroying the very research that represented their only hope. But now, I understood something I'd missed the first time. David wasn't just stealing my work out of malice. He was stealing it out of terror. That evening, I stood in my laboratory, looking at the nearly completed first batch of synthesized medication. In my first life, David had contaminated 3 separate batches before producing anything viable. Each contamination had cost weeks of progress, time neither he nor his father could afford. My secure computer chimed with another message from Dr. Webb. This one contained security camera footage from Mercy General's research wing. I watched David stumble through procedures I'd perfected years ago, saw him ignore safety protocols that existed for crucial reasons, witnessed him growing increasingly frustrated as each batch failed. In one clip, he actually threw a beaker across the lab in rage, behaviour that would have gotten any legitimate researcher banned from the facility immediately. But David wasn't just any researcher. He was the director's son, untouchable despite his incompetence. The irony was devastating. While David destroyed batch after batch in his stolen position, I was perfecting the very medication that could save both their lives in my private laboratory, if I chose to save them. The thought stopped me cold. In my first life, I'd had no choice in the matter. By the time I'd learned of their conditions, it had been too late to help. But now, armed with foreknowledge and my own production capability, I held their fates entirely in my hands. I could save them both. David could have his legacy, Harrison could live to see his grandchildren, and Victoria could keep her family intact. Or I could let justice run its course, watching them destroy themselves with the same casual cruelty they'd showed me. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. David contaminated another batch today. 3rd one this week. Hospital administrators are starting to ask questions. Harrison looks like he hasn't slept in days. I typed back, document everything. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. But what was the truth exactly? That David deserved to die for his arrogance? That Harrison deserved to suffer for his nepotism? Or that sometimes the universe presented impossible choices between justice and mercy? I looked at the medication in my hands, clear, perfect, ready for testing. The same medication that could save 2 lives or serve as the ultimate instrument of revenge. For the first time since my rebirth, I wasn't certain which path I wanted to choose. The next morning would bring new challenges, new revelations, and new opportunities for both salvation and retribution. But tonight, I stood alone in my laboratory, holding the power of life and death in a small glass vial. The question that haunted me wasn't whether I could save them. The question was whether I should. The decision crystallized the moment I received Elena's emergency call at 2:47 a.m. Camilla, you need to know. David collapsed in the lab tonight. They rushed him to the ER. Her voice was shaking. But that's not the worst part. Before the paramedics arrived, he destroyed everything. All the research, all the samples, everything. He was screaming that if he couldn't complete it, no one could. I sat up in bed, fully alert. How is he now? Stable, but barely. His heart is failing faster than anyone expected. And Camilla, Harrison is talking about shutting down the entire cardiac research program. He says if David can't lead it, it's not worth continuing. Perfect. David's desperation had just handed me the ultimate leverage. Eleanor, I need you to do something for me. Can you access the hospital's research database remotely? Yes, but why? Because in about 6 hours, I'm going to save everyone's life. But I need you to document that David destroyed 2 months of hospital research in a tantrum. Every detail. After hanging up, I moved through my laboratory with purpose. The medication was ready. Had been ready for days while I wrestled with conscience. But David's destructive act had made my choice for me. If he wanted to destroy research, I'd show him what real destruction looked like. By dawn, I had everything prepared. The presentation folder contained not just my perfected medication formula, but proof of David's academic fraud, documentation of his safety violations, and a detailed timeline showing how his incompetence had cost the hospital nearly $250,000 in wasted resources. Most importantly, it contained his father's complete medical history. Harrison's secretary seemed surprised when I called requesting an emergency meeting. Dr. Reed, I thought you were... aren't you... Terminated? Yes, but I have information Director Harrison desperately needs. Tell him I have a solution to his cardiac research crisis. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. I arrived 15 minutes early, noting the unusual number of senior staff members hurrying through the corridors. Word of David's collapse had spread quickly. Harrison's office looked different now. The confident authority had been replaced by something approaching panic. He sat behind his desk like a man watching his world crumble, which I supposed he was. Camilla. He didn't stand when I entered. I hear you want to discuss our research program. I want to discuss your son's future. I placed the folder on his desk but didn't open it. And yours. His face tightened. I don't think you're in any position to make demands. Actually, I'm in the only position that matters. I leaned forward slightly. David destroyed your research last night. Your cardiac program is defunct. Your hospital board is asking uncomfortable questions about nepotism and failed leadership. And your heart is failing. The colour drained from his face. What are you talking about? Congenital hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, genetic marker 14q11. 2. Your last EKG showed significant deterioration. You have maybe 4 months before complete cardiac failure. I opened the folder to reveal his medical records. The same condition that's killing your son. How did you... The same way I know that David's online medical degree is fraudulent, that he's violated federal research protocols 17 times in 2 months, and that his tantrum last night cost your hospital its entire cardiac research credibility. I spread the documents across his desk methodically. The same way I know you're about to lose everything unless you accept my help. Harrison stared at the evidence of his son's failures, his own mortality, his crumbling legacy. What do you want? I want to save your life, both your lives. I pulled out a small vial of clear liquid. This is the cardiac medication your son has been trying to replicate. Perfected, tested, and ready for human trials. It can reverse your condition completely. He reached for it instinctively, then stopped. What's the catch? The catch is that you're going to publicly acknowledge that David is unqualified for his position. You're going to restore my reputation and reinstate me as head of cardiac research. And you're going to sign over 40% ownership of any patents derived from my work. 40%? That's fair compensation for what you stole from me. My voice remained calm, businesslike. You destroyed my career to advance your son's fantasy. Now you'll rebuild it to save both your lives. Harrison's hands shook as he picked up David's falsified transcripts. If this gets out, it will destroy him. Director Harrison, your son is dying. In 6 months, maybe less. You can spend that time protecting a lie. or you can spend it helping him find genuine meaning in whatever time he has left. I stood to leave. The choice is yours, but the medication comes with my terms or not at all. Wait! His voice cracked. Can you really save him? I can extend his life significantly. Give him maybe 2 years, possibly 3 if he follows the treatment protocol exactly. Enough time to find his real purpose instead of trying to steal mine. The silence stretched between us as Harrison absorbed the magnitude of his situation. His pride warred with his desperation, his love for David battling his hatred of admitting failure. I need time to think. You have until David is discharged from the hospital. After that, I take my research elsewhere. I collected my documents, leaving only his medical records and David's fraud evidence. Phoenix Pharmaceuticals has already made me 3 different offers. I am sure they'd be fascinated by these documents. As I reached the door, Harrison called out, Camilla, in your first offer to Phoenix, did you mention our research? I turned back with a smile that held no warmth. Director Harrison, I haven't spoken to Phoenix about anything yet. But if you force me to leave again, I'll make sure they know exactly why Mercy General's cardiac program is such a spectacular failure. That afternoon, Eleanor texted me updates every hour. Harrison had called an emergency board meeting. David had been moved to a private room under cardiac observation. Victoria Harrison had arrived and locked herself in her husband's office for 2 hours. By evening, my secure phone rang. Dr. Reed, this is Victoria Harrison. Robert would like to discuss your terms. And David. A long pause. David doesn't know about his father's condition yet. But when we told him about yours, about how his actions had destroyed the research, he broke down completely. He wants to apologize. Apologies won't restart his heart, Mrs. Harrison. No, but your medication might. Please, Camilla. He's just a frightened young man who made terrible choices because he was terrified of dying meaninglessly. I looked at the vial of medication sitting on my desk, the power to grant or deny life to 2 men who had tried to destroy me. The irony was so perfect, it felt orchestrated by fate itself. Tell your husband I'll be in my old office tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. If my nameplate is back on the door and my research team is reinstated, we can begin David's treatment immediately. And if not, then I hope Phoenix Pharmaceuticals appreciates the full story of Mercy General's research ethics, including the part where the director knowingly allowed his unqualified son to handle experimental medications. After hanging up, I stood at my laboratory window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. Somewhere out there, Harrison was facing the same choice he'd forced on me, swallow his pride or watch everything he cared about slip away. The difference was, I actually had the power to save what mattered most. Tomorrow would determine whether Harrison was capable of choosing his son's life over his own ego. But either way, I had already won. At 7:58 a.m., I stood before the door that should have displayed my nameplate. It was blank. For a moment, I wondered if Harrison had truly chosen pride over his son's life. Then, Eleanor appeared at the end of the hallway, practically running toward me. Camilla, thank God you're here. Harrison collapsed 20 minutes ago. They rushed him to the cardiac unit. She was breathless, panicked. David is stable, but barely. Victoria is... She's been asking for you. Perfect timing. Harrison's heart had finally decided to cooperate with my timeline. I followed Eleanor through corridors I'd walked countless times, but now I moved as a conqueror, returning to claim her throne. The cardiac unit buzzed with activity, nurses, residents, and the unmistakable tension of life hanging in the balance. Victoria Harrison sat beside her son's bed, her face drawn with exhaustion. David looked smaller than I remembered, tubes and monitors transforming him from arrogant usurper to dying child. Mrs. Harrison. She looked up, hope and desperation warring in her eyes. Camilla? Robert? He wanted to agree to your terms, but then he collapsed before he could sign anything. The legal department says without his signature, "The deal is void," I finished. "I understand." David's eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with difficulty. "Dr. Reed." His voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I destroyed everything because I was angry at myself, not you. I knew I wasn't good enough. Something twisted in my chest, an emotion I didn't want to acknowledge. "David, why did you think you could handle pharmaceutical research?" "Because I was dying anyway." A tear slipped down his cheek. "I thought if I could just prove I was worthy of something, anything, then maybe my life would have mattered." The raw honesty of it hit harder than expected. In my first life, I had seen David only as an obstacle, a symbol of nepotism and unfairness. I'd never considered that he might be as much a victim of circumstances as I was. But circumstances had changed now. "David, I need you to listen very carefully. I have the medication that can save your life and your father's. But I need something from you first." His eyes widened. "Anything. I need you to publicly admit that you falsified your credentials and were never qualified for the research position. I need you to acknowledge that your actions destroyed months of legitimate research and endangered patient safety." My voice was steady, professional. "And I need you to recommend that I be reinstated immediately to prevent further damage to the hospital's reputation." "You want me to confess everything?" "I want you to tell the truth. For once." Victoria gripped her son's hand. "David, she's offering you life. Your pride isn't worth more than that." David closed his eyes, and for a moment I thought he might refuse. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay, yes, I'll do whatever you need." I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. "Then let's begin." For the next 10 minutes, David Harrison confessed to academic fraud, research incompetence, and willful destruction of hospital property. His voice grew stronger as he spoke, as if the truth was physically healing him. When he finished, I stopped the recording and placed the first vial of medication on his bedside table. "This is a single dose. It will stabilize your heart function for approximately 72 hours, long enough for you to make your confession public and for the hospital board to reinstate me. And then I save your life properly." Dr. Nathan Cross chose that moment to appear in the doorway, his face grim. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm afraid I have difficult news about your husband." "How difficult?" I asked before Victoria could respond. Cross looked surprised to see me. "Dr. Reed, I thought you were—" "She's consulting on David's case," Victoria said quickly. "What about Robert?" "His heart function has deteriorated significantly, without immediate intervention." Cross hesitated. "We're looking at hours, not days." I nodded calmly. "Dr. Cross, I'll need you to prepare 2 cardiac suites immediately. We're going to perform experimental treatment on both patients simultaneously." "Experimental treatment? Dr. Reed, you don't have authorization to—" "Actually, as of right now, she does." Victoria stood, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting. David's confession gives us grounds to invalidate his appointment and restore Dr. Reed's position immediately." "Mrs. Harrison, hospital protocol doesn't work that way." "Hospital protocol is about to change very rapidly, Dr. Cross." I met his gaze directly. "Because in about an hour, the media is going to receive a very interesting story about medical fraud at Mercy General. The question is whether they'll be reporting on a scandal or a miraculous recovery." The next hour blurred past in a symphony of controlled chaos. The hospital board convened in emergency session. David's recorded confession played in the boardroom, and my nameplate reappeared on my office door as if by magic. More importantly, both Harrison men were prepped for treatment in adjacent cardiac suites. I stood between the two rooms, holding identical vials of medication, the product of my genius, stolen and nearly destroyed by their arrogance, now returned to save the very lives that had tried to ruin mine. "Dr. Reed," Eleanor appeared beside me. "The treatments are ready to begin. Both patients are stable for the procedures." I looked through the glass at Harrison, unconscious and vulnerable, then at David, awake and watching me with something approaching reverence. "Eleanor, I want you to document everything that happens next, every detail." "Of course, but Camilla, why does this feel like more than just medical treatment?" I smiled, feeling a sense of completion I'd never experienced in my first life. "Because it is more. This is justice." I administered Harrison's medication first, watching his heart rhythm stabilize on the monitors. The man who had destroyed my career now depended entirely on my expertise for his next breath. Then, David's treatment. As the medication entered his system, his colour improved visibly, his breathing eased, and for the first time in months, his vital signs showed genuine stability. "Dr. Reed," David whispered as I checked his readings, "why did you save us after everything we did to you?" I considered the question carefully. "David, in my research, I learned something important about the heart. It's not just a muscle that pumps blood. It's the centre of everything we are. Our capacity for both cruelty and kindness, destruction and healing." "I don't understand." "Your heart was failing because it was filled with fear and desperation. Your father's heart was failing because it was filled with pride and guilt. But my heart..." I paused, realizing the truth as I spoke it. "My heart was failing because it was filled with anger and bitterness. And now all our hearts are healing." 6 weeks later, I stood in my restored laboratory, larger now, better funded, with a team of researchers who actually deserved their positions. David had become my most dedicated assistant, his near-death experience having transformed his arrogance into genuine humility and determination. Harrison had returned to work, but in a reduced capacity that acknowledged both his recovery and his mistakes. He'd personally recommended me for the hospital's highest research honour, and Phoenix Pharmaceuticals had withdrawn their offers, recognising that Mercy General now had the industry's most promising cardiac programme. Most surprisingly, Victoria had become something approaching a friend, our shared experience creating an unexpected bond. But the real victory was simpler than any of that. I had died once, consumed by bitterness and regret. I had been reborn with the power to choose revenge or redemption, and I had chosen to heal, not just two dying hearts, but my own wounded soul. As I watched David carefully calibrate equipment with the precision I'd taught him, I realized that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's saving them and making them spend the rest of their lives grateful for your mercy. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Another research hospital, another offer, another opportunity to leverage my newfound reputation. I let it ring, focusing instead on the work that mattered. The next breakthrough, the next life saved, the next chance to prove that brilliance combined with compassion could change the world. After all, I had all the time in the world now, and my heart had never been stronger.